To move on now to the next stage of our afternoon's event. We are going to have a look at our program committee and have an interaction with three members. Jef, who needs no further introduction, has been with us for several hours this afternoon doing sterling work, stays on to help discuss with us about the program committee's involvement, because the program committee played an advisory role in setting up the Endorse conference to ensure synergies with all the different relevant stakeholders. So not an easy task, and one that was very much appreciated by the organisers here. Joining Jef, we have two other members of the programme committee. We have Olaf-Michael Stefanov, who is Vice President of the International Association for Language Technology, and who over a 36-year career at the UN managed various IT-related areas and introduced the first completely web-based multilingual terminology database handling Arabic, Chinese, Cyrillic and Latin scripts for input, query and output. So something we may get you to talk about, Olaf-Michael. And Wouter Schallier, Chief of the Library and Web Services at the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean in Chile, has likewise a stellar career, and he was between 2008 and 2012 was Executive Director of the Association of European Research Libraries in The Hague. So spanning the globe, gentlemen, and bringing in a great depth of knowledge from beyond the EU. We're quite keen to hear your thoughts, and I will remind our audience again, you can put your questions to these members of the committee by scanning the QR code on the screen and going to Slido and putting your question in, or by going to slido.com on your browser and inputting Endorse 2023. And remember, if you're putting in the questions for a specific individual, do say who that question is to. So I think a first general question to all of you, about semantic technologies in your everyday lives and their tangible impacts. Which examples during Endorse over the last 3 afternoons did you find the most striking? Perhaps Wouter, I could start with you first and then work back.
Thank you so much for the question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, I've missed several sessions. But I think what Jef already mentioned is that there was a nice mix of technical sessions on the one hand, and on the other hand, sessions that emphasize more the human aspect. I think in the end, what is important here is that when we talk about technology, when we talk about data, and this kind of things, in the end, it's about our values, right? So what kind of values as human beings do we want to hold very high? And so we mentioned, I heard in several sessions talking about bias and this kind of things. So how can we make sure that through technology and through data, we don't perpetuate those biases, but that we actually eliminate the biases. And this is, I think, a very important point. How do we make sure that technology and data become the vehicle to achieve and to the values that we think are important as human beings? We also heard a lot about transparency, diversity, and also, I'm not sure whether that was touched upon, but how can technology help us to resolve our big challenges as a humanity? And this is something that, I mean, in the concept of the United Nations 2030 agenda, of course, is very important. How can we make sure that we eliminate hunger, poverty, that we achieve more equality, and that we eliminate these biases that we already mentioned? So how do we make sure that as citizens, or that we basically achieve this goal of becoming digital citizens? And how do we do this through our profession as information managers, by giving them access to information? How do we make sure that citizens become digital citizens and are in the capacity to exercise their digital rights, and not just remain digital consumers. So for me, I mean, this mix of technical sessions and the sessions that touched more upon this human dimension, I think was a really interesting mix, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Wouter. As you said, we can't all be in two places at once, and we have parallel tracks, so I don't expect anyone's been able to see every single thing over the last few days. But Olaf-Michael, let me ask the same question to you. What parts of the conference were most striking when it came to talking about the semantic technologies in our everyday lives, those tangible impacts?
What really impressed me, and it started really with the short speech of the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, was the level of knowledge that almost all the speakers were able to pass on. We're at a cusp now where we're going from just the theory of making these things work to actually seeing various tools, learning about various tools that are actually implementing these things. And I think it is therefore been very good and very important that human aspects, security aspects, bias aspects, quality not getting lost due to implementing of tools is looked at very carefully because, as we know, and it was touched on a couple of times, AI tools such as Chat GDP has just come very, very recently and is basically overwhelming the world as a whole. And if we don't watch out and we don't take care of those human aspects, those security aspects, then we could find ourselves actually at the losing end. And I think I would like to commend everybody who organized this conference, that the balance between the technical people, the example demo people, and those who have philosophical and security aspects in mind was a very, very good balance. And I thought that the final panel today was excellent in that regard, in going further than most panels usually do in hitting the important points. There were a couple of really excellent things, and I thought that the pairing of having two or three talks on a very similar point, following up also on the last Endorse conference, was also very good. And I think I'll just wrap up on that. I would like to commend, before I close though, the keynote speakers of day one and day two. They were very important. And when you think about the keynote speaker of day one, how are we doing so far? It's in a way a shame that she isn't here now as part of this wrap-up session, because it would be interesting to see what her view is after having taken part in these 3 days. So I'll wrap up here, and I'm hoping we get one or two questions from the audience.
Thank you. We do indeed have a couple of questions. But Jef, I'll move on to you with the next question because it does relate back to that panel we just had. Do you see any data quality issues or other negative impacts within the evolution in linked data, semantic technologies, AI applications, and so on? And can standards help here? I'm sure you'll say standards certainly can, based on that last panel.
Sure, but my answer is very, very much linked to what Olaf just mentioned, because my notes are very similar. Actually, I think we have so many. Over the years, we have really made a major developments in all the knowledge graphs. I've personally been following it for almost 10 years as my background as a researcher. And I really see now that this is evolving to very practical applications. Also in my organization, in the European Commission, we really have very good business-driven use cases now. However, I completely agree with Olaf-Michael and with the keynote speakers here and with many talks I've seen today that we should not forget about our fundamentals. And this is data quality. We need to focus, we need to really make sure that we still have the same requirements and level of requirements for our data quality standards. If we start losing our grip on the quality, our knowledge, the output of our knowledge graph is really not that good anymore. The second challenge on that aspect is related to the fact that in reality, when you work in an organization such as a commission, but also I've worked in different settings, it's really difficult to overcome silos in organizations, and we work on standards, but and I see many technical evolutions that are really very good enablers, even with the newest AI developments. But in many cases we have here at the Commission and in other organizations, the real blocking factors are still a sensitivity of political files or human aspects, and then at the negotiation level. So those are two things I wanted to point out: data quality and the human aspect, again, like in my panel, of this future.
Thank you, Jef. Wouter, let me come on to a next question that's building there on some of Jef's points regarding knowledge graphs. Taking into account Gartner's forecast, by 2025, knowledge graphs will be used in 80% of data innovations, and that's up 10% from 2021. How do you see the future for semantic technologies in our automated lives, our automated societies? What's your outlook?
I don't have a crystal ball, of course, but yeah, I mean, I think it's when we talk about semantics, ontologies, taxonomies, and this kind of things, we're really talking about the human dimension, right? So about adding this human logic to artificial intelligence, to make sure that that there's this initiative of United Nations, which is artificial intelligence for good, right? So that we basically achieve through artificial intelligence, through semantics, what we want to achieve as human beings. So, I mean, obviously, it's already there. I mean, we see it in our lives, but I think we have to make it much more accessible to citizens. Technology is something that has to be accessible, has to be, democratic, transparent, and these are things that we also heard during several sessions, that this is one of the things that we need to achieve through data, to making available data, this transparency, and I mean, when we talk about data quality, we previously discussed, this is something that we also see here, for example, in Latin America and the Caribbean, where Latin America and the Caribbean, we have Latin America, where I would say there's still an issue of availability of, in the Caribbean, where there's still an issue of availability of data. And this is something that we see, and this is something that we are working on here through the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. While in Latin America, the issue is more, let's say, usability of data, which is also something which is really important, and which is trying to work on here through the Economic Commission for Latin America. So just to close, when people talk about artificial intelligence, people, and this is kind of a summary of what the points I wanted to make. When you talk about, or people talk about artificial intelligence, people talk about, yes, I mean, there's going to be robots and they're going to replace people and there will be no more jobs, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, work is a right? It's part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we have to make sure that artificial intelligence and these new technologies make sure that they create jobs And this, I think, is one of the values that we have as human beings, and one of the objectives that we have to keep in mind. So we have to make sure that this becomes, that it helps us to achieve our goals as human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we couldn't agree more. Olaf-Michael, I was going to come to you with the same question anyway. Gaze into your crystal ball and tell us what you see.
Again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I have some suggestions. One, I agree with my colleague in the fact that we need to educate the general public, but perhaps even more critical, we need to take the messages from this conference to politicians, and perhaps not only politicians, but also influencers. They're a new breed of people in the last few years who have an increasingly large influence on also what politicians do and say and support. We need the general public to understand what data can do for them. Yes, but in order to have it happen, we need the support of those people who have the purse strings and those people who can influence these people. So I think one of the messages that everybody at this conference should take back to their various stakeholders is find those stakeholders who can help make it happen, who can help make the information more generally known. And at the same time, while we're making it known, we do have to warn that since all of these tools are basically human created, they will have all the shortcomings that practically all human interaction has had over the centuries, over the millennia. There will be a certain amount of corruption. There will be a certain amount of deterioration of data. Data is not perfect. So we have to make sure that we introduce ways of catching this. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I'm going to give one final wrap-up question. It's a multiple choice question. Were the expectations you had while working on submissions and on the program met? So you can tell me a little, a lot, or they were vastly surpassed. Wouter, you first.
Sorry, I missed your question.
Were
Can you
your
repeat it, please?
expectations met from the Endorsed Conference based on the submissions you were receiving while working on the program?
And the options were?
A little, a lot, or we vastly exceeded them?
A lot.
Okay. And Olaf-Michael?
A lot.
A lot. And Jef, finally yours? A lot. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you for taking the time to wrap up. It's a difficult job when you get to the end of 3 days, I know, to try and be concise and succinct and really distill what we've seen over the last few days. But of course, there's still some closing remarks to come. So thank you, gentlemen.